Hi, I'm Tom Eschen, the host of this Power and Politics podcast. The conversation about the issues impacting New Yorkers the most with the people that are making those big decisions, holding them accountable as well. Today we speak with Jim Tedisco, the state senator running for re-election in New York's 44th Senate District, and he's going up against Manita Sanghvi for that campaign here in November. And we'll speak with Manita Sanghvi as well as a part of this week's coverage of that campaign. As for the Jim Tedisco interview, we go over a myriad of topics, including bail reform. We talk about immigration, along with education as well. And he also brings up Proposal 1 and some of the facets of that we will dive into much more. So thank you so much for listening or watching. You can listen wherever you get your podcast, so please subscribe now. You can also watch on our YouTube page, CBS 6 Albany. Thank you, Senator Tedisco, for coming on with us today.
My pleasure to be here with you,
as
always.
So we have a lot of different issues to talk about over the course of the next few minutes, and of course in our extended version as well. If you can boil it down to one, from speaking with your constituents and also being now on the campaign trail, what is the biggest issue facing those in your district right now?
Well, let me just say this. I think most of my constituents know this is a beautiful state. We love this state. Most of the constituents love it. They want to stay here. It's the Empire State. When I interact with them, they don't say this directly, but it seems they're leaning towards that. But soon we'll be the empty state. You know, our slogan's, I love New York. Right now, unfortunately, in this beautiful state, it's I leave New York. And the two largest issues that they talk to me about, and it's not surprising, and it started 6 years ago. It started 6 years ago, and you know this, when all levers of power became controlled by one party, from one affiliation, from one region of the state. Democrat, seemed to be a little bit radical, but it has gotten more and more extreme and radical along the way. And when you look at it, and when I say the Empire State, because of their agenda, last year, you know this, and we've talked about that, we're number one in outmigration of all 50 states. 101,000 constituents walked out of the state of New York last year. 1 million over the last 6 years after they controlled the entire agenda. Now, I think I passed some very pertinent and important bills, but many of the bills that will make the change that are necessary to keep our constituents here and bring more here to live, work, build a business, build a family, are locked up in committee. They seem to keep doubling down on the issues that are forcing people to leave. We're not only number one in outmigration, we're one of 7 states that lost another congressperson, lost the power for those to speak up for us. And we're number one, and you asked the question, we're number one in Tax Freedom Day. Most of my constituents, I think by now, know that. But Tax Freedom Day is the day when you and I and the people who work in New York State actually take $1 home that doesn't go to taxes. It's almost into the middle of May. We're almost 6 months of socialization, taking our constituents' money and then spreading it out through them in not the very best way. $2.4 billion for illegal aliens who are not vetting to really know they may need asylum and want to move towards citizenship.
Let's start there. Okay, let's go there then. The $2.4 billion, because I did want to ask you about that, because you look at that chunk of money. I guess what else would you want the state to do? Because the people are already here. If you don't invest in their legal services or their housing, what's going to happen with these individuals, I guess?
Yeah.
If you don't put the funding in, because they're already here at the end of the day.
Yeah, we want those thousands of housings to go to the citizens of New York State and the United States of America, okay? In other words, it's a border problem to begin with. We had a process 4 years ago, and by the way, the single question we have to ask ourselves in relationship to the border, in relationship to this migration problem, in relationship to the economy and inflation, by the way, those are the two highest concerns my constituents talk to me about. The cost of living, public safety, and this migration issue.
If there's an out-migration issue, there's also 100,000 plus that have come in.
No, there's about 200.
Okay, so there's more
come in.
But can that help? You know, if they do the process the correct way, could that help fill, I guess, some of the void?
Oh, if they, you said it. You hit the nail on it. If we do it the correct way, we had a process of assimilation, and I have to say this: the number one question, which can be asked here in New York State, if you're a candidate and you're running for office, and my opponent is doubling down, doesn't really have her own agenda, but is supporting the agenda that has failed miserably, the one that has made 101,000 people leave the state of New York. The answer to that is to deal with the economy and to deal with a process which doesn't have you beat the drum and say, come one, Come on, we're the asylum city, New York City, we're the asylum state, and then act hypocritically. What did Mayor Adams do when they came? Not so much, he put them on buses and sent them to upstate New York. And then he said, you're destroying New York City. Now, wait a second. This is the man who chastised Texas and Arizona and said, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you accepting these people? Tom, they're using this agenda as a political tool. They failed for the last 4 years to develop a process of assimilation at the federal level. Now at the last hour, the 11th hour, we have an agenda to fix this. It's so hypocritical, it's unbelievable now. And if they didn't have an agenda for 4 years, in the question that we should be asking, which Kamala Harris could not answer, are you and I and the constituents I represent, by the way, the number one most important group in this representative democracy. They're not me as a senator, they're not assembly people, they're not governors, they're not presidents, they're the citizens who are going to be the final endorsement individuals. I've gotten 20 endorsements that I went for interviews on. My opponent got none of them. The number one endorsement, though, comes on November 5th, and it will.
The voters,
so,
right?
The voters, they'll be the final endorsement. And they tell us, you broke the economy, you broke the public safety issue. 49 other states give the judges the discretion to decide if a person is a danger to themselves or others. I have the bill, bipartisan. Angelo Santa Barbara carries it in the Senate, in the Assembly, to give our judges the same opportunity for discretion to say, you're a danger to themselves or others. You saw Lola.
You were one of the first, I think you were the first to release a statement regarding how the judge handled that situation. What did you say and why did you say it?
Well, I carry the bill to do what 49 other states do. Common sense, and there's a big lacking of that. To give discretion to the judge to decide if a person before them is a danger to themselves or others. This is a serious problem in New York State, which has got to be solved. What happened here, I'm the ranker on the tourism committee and the parks committee. We want tourism. We want people to come to New York State. We want them to invest and spend their money, build businesses. We don't want criminal tourism. And that's what this was. 3 individuals from Washington, D.C. came here and burglarized twice Lola's, a woman's apparel business, a great business. My opponent actually defended those 3 individuals after the judge said, look, you've got several felonies. You were going 125 miles an hour running away from the police. You went into some of the municipalities. That was very dangerous. You're going to be shocked by the fact I'm telling you. I'm going to have to give you tickets and let you walk out now and come back again. I'm probably going to have to do that twice. I don't think they were shocked. I think they came here because they know the penalties are so low and that hardly anyone goes to jail anymore, even for violent crimes. The morale of the police is so low. They keep arresting people. They're getting tickets. When they're finally adjudicated and they have to go to jail, they're running. They have to arrest them again. The real crime and more crime that's taking place, they can't get to. That impacts the people that leave their house, not only with a uniform, but with a Kevlar vest, because they took an oath of office to get between a perpetrator and someone who they're going to have to save. When they go home, the best thing their family can hear is that Velcro coming off, and they're taking over that Kevlar vest off. So she said nothing about the business itself for compassion, but she defended the 3 of those individuals who committed those burglaries.
The judge in this situation, I did speak with some people who think that he could have kept them behind bars because they could have been a flight risk, of course, and also they could have looked in their past. There were some things the judge could have considered in that situation. Yeah. Do you think that, and I know the legislature in this past session gave more money for training for judges. Do you think that the judges, it needs to be put more on them to not make this decision political, or look at some of the factors that they are given at a bigger rate to help these laws, because they're not changing anytime soon, are they?
Well, they said they've changed this law 3 times. They've tweaked it, they said. Every time they tweak it, these people continue to be released, dangerous people into our community. It's a get out of jail free card. But make no mistake, we've got raise the age, we've got what's called HALT, we've got less is more. All this is a part of the criminal justice system to weight the scales in favor of the predators and not innocent, honest, law-abiding victims. Now listen, judges are intelligent, they're smart, they know the law, they read the law.
Do you think some are making these decisions politically? Because the judge in that case in Saratoga said the great state of New York, almost kind of saying, it felt a little bit of an edge there.
Why would it, they have a 14-year term. Why would they want to make something political? When they release them out into the street and they commit another crime, they're the ones who are getting blamed for that. They don't want to release them out into the street. So to use that red herring, oh, they can do this and they can do that, and then when they go to do it, they have the attorneys there. Both attorneys are there, and the judges discuss that with both attorneys. They know when they have to release them because the other attorney has made the case, and the case is made because of the criminal justice system they put in place, with my opponent has doubled down on and supported by defending these individuals and say they showed up because they knew they were going to be released. Finally, when they adjudicate this and they're going to be sentenced, not so sure they showed up. But it's not only them showing up, it's what did they do in the meantime when they showed they were violent beforehand, the impact they can have. And in terms of domestic violence, those people who commit domestic violence, usually men, are angry. You've got to have a cooling off period. Ask anybody who's a professional in the field. Now they come before the judge. In the cases of domestic violence, they still have to give them a ticket and let them walk. That cooling off period is very dangerous for the women. We had a case in a part of my district where a man had a machete, maybe you saw it, and a gun. The police were able to get him out. He was with his wife, threatening her. He got a ticket to be released, and was pretty close to going back to her again and committing more crimes, may have taken her life. So we're talking about public safety as one of the top issues, and we're talking about affordability and the inflation factor. I mean, hey, I like the Buffalo Bills. $600 million for a football field. I like the movies I see. $750 million for Hollywood moguls to come here, spend 3 days, do a little bit of a movie, create some jobs, and leave. The Empire Center said that's the worst tax credit. We actually lose money on it for the constituents here in New York State.
Good government group.
It's political action.
Yeah, good.
Politics.
You did mention your opponent a couple times, so I will bring up some of the things said about you. And I know that you've mentioned before, you're not much of a mudslinger or whatever, and you don't want to go on any attack, but I do want you to address some of the things that were said in a mailer that recently went out. Jim Tedisco consistently voted against reproductive freedom and has been supported by radical groups that would ban abortion in New York State. What is your response to that?
Well, first let me say my constituents know who I am. And as I said, they're the greatest endorsement. That's why I've been here term after term after term, and I'm pretty confident that they'll support me because of my strong voice. But the one thing they hate the most, there's two things. It's mudslinging, name-calling, and personal attacks. And they know a second thing. We're elected officials, we're public servants, and we're representatives. I stand up for my constituents and I represent them. Now, what she's actually saying is not the truth, because in 1970, abortion became legalized in New York State. That was 3 years before Roe versus Wade. It was already legal, and it continues to be more and more and more abortions taking place. It is not going to change in New York State because there are supermajorities in the Senate, supermajority in the Assembly, and the governor is in support of it. But what is taking place with this so-called ERA is constitutionalizing something beyond even that. It's getting into the area of men and boys thinking or believing or identifying as women and taking away something that women have fought for their entire lives, to be able to compete and be the best woman in a sport like soccer, like volleyball. That's another misnomer that's very dangerous. But the Supreme Court had it right. It's not in the Constitution. You know why I know? I carry the Constitution.
You showed that to me
I
before.
carry it every place I go. I believe it in 100%.
It is up to the states then, and New York is
the
trying
Supreme
to
Court
codify it as a state right
what
now.
better way in a representative democracy than let the people decide in their particular state, elect those elected officials who make the guidelines and procedures which relate to this whole process. And believe me, it's a sensitive issue. It's a private issue. My compassion goes out for women. But here's one last thing I like to say. My constituents love to use this as a political tool. They want to argue about it. But on the other side, there are things we agree upon, but they won't touch, they won't even talk about. Let me tell you what that is. Every one of us, whether we're pro-life or pro-choice, would like to see the number of unwanted pregnancies reduced. Let me repeat that. The number of unwanted pregnancies reduced. Because you don't make this decision unless there's a pregnancy. Now, I'm not talking about a woman's health and safety or rape and incest. I'm talking about irresponsible behavior. I keep talking to my constituents. How about new, unique, innovative programs to be sent out there in different formats, in libraries, schools, different areas, to teach young people or adults what irresponsible behavior is, to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. Can't we come to an agreement on that?
Is Planned Parenthood a part of that?
Why not?
That was listed as one of the votes that you voted against state funding for organizations like that.
Why not Planned Parenthood? Yeah, if they really believe in openness and honesty and giving them all the information, how about some programs so they put themselves out of business? Because I think they would like to put themselves out of business. We'd like to see no unwanted pregnancies. Now, I'm not saying that's ever possible to be the case, but can't we invest? We put millions of dollars to pay away the problem. Couldn't we put some dollars in it for innovative programs? And yes, Planned Parenthood could have that program and some of those programs to say, here's the responsible things to do. Here's what you can think about. Here's why it would make a difference, not only for the lives of unborn children. You know, we could fight over viability, but it's never going to change, first of all, in New York State because of the power of supermajorities. And I think it makes sense, if it's not codified in this document I have, which is a great document, that the most important part of this representative democracy should make the decisions via voting the people who tell them this is the guidelines we believe in. It may be different in New York State. It may be different in Iowa. It may be different in Ohio. But those are different groups of people. Not in the Constitution. Why not give it back to the people in this representative democracy? The most important part of this representative democracy will make the most important decision in terms of an endorsement in November of this year.
I do want to touch on one of the things you mentioned, because it's been talked about a lot in Proposal 1. It's the Protect Women's Sports has been what some have been saying regarding that. It was, I believe, Nassau County, Bruce Blakeman, the county executive, made a lot of headlines when he passed executive orders and what have you against this. And then I talked to some people down there. They said, we've never had a case of this, of any of the men playing women's sports that had transitioned. Is there any evidence for you of that around that people that you think should be concerned about? I think that's what a lot of people have wondered, if this is actually happening.
Well, it's actually happening. I was going door to door just the other day, and a woman was telling me about her daughter plays in one of the colleges, and she was telling me about an individual who that happened with. And that's really not the point. She was telling me her daughter doesn't feel comfortable going into a woman's men's room and having a man, biological man, right next to her in a stall, or going into a shower next to her. That really concerned her. But my good friends on the other side of the aisle are very good at making up names which sound glorious, but the opposite happens. Most of the things in that Equal Right Amendment are already equal rights for everybody right now. Okay, it is not an ERA, Equal Rights Amendment 1. It is an ERA eliminating the rights of many of the adults to assess the well-being and health and medical procedures, augmentation of their body, plastic surgery for a lot of young children. There's going to be a lot of lawsuits about that. So it's not only about men beating up women and breaking records of women. I've seen it in swimming. You've seen it in swimming on TV. Listen, there's XX and there's XY. Now, if they want to have a transition, I think they should say and be and qualify themselves whatever they want to be. Maybe that should be a separate group of individuals competing against them. Men transitioning to women, women transitioning to men. Maybe they should be challenging them. But to say you're actually a woman when biologically you were born a man and have those chromosomes which are different, but taking away what women fought for is very problematic for me at least. But it's more the elimination of the rights of parents to oversee medical procedures also for their children, which is extremely, extremely important. I mean, these are young kids whose brains are not fully developed yet. And so this is going to be a real challenge, I think, the vote for this, because there'll be a lot of lawsuits after this. And I hope the right thing happens one way or another.
All right. Let's go back to public safety and law enforcement because it involves, once again, something said about you. So I want to give you an opportunity to respond. I will say the bills cited in this one, in terms of the mailer, were the budget bills that I believe that you voted against as probably as a Republican and fiscally conservative. And
well, this is an old tool they use.
And it was about voting against millions of new law enforcement funding. So I just want to preface it to say they use the budget bills as the example of that. But I just wanted you to respond to that statement that you don't support, that you voted against law enforcement funding.
When I talk about candidates I run against, which upset people, that's a part of it, distorting the truth. I voted against a $259 billion budget, increased spending by close to 12%, close to $10 billion. $2.4 billion of that money went to illegal aliens, for housing, for credit cards for $2,000. I wasn't going to vote for that entire, but certainly I support the funding for law enforcement. That was, you could call it a distortion, but it's really a lie, and you shouldn't lie to your constituents. Jim Tedisco didn't vote against money for law enforcement. He voted for a budget that was going to give $2.4 billion to people who are illegally for an assimilation process. And the question is for my opponent, 6 years, they had control of all levels of power. She supports theirs, and she showed her hypocrisy because, you know, she signed up to run for the Senate weeks before she went before the voters to run for the Commissioner of Finance. She never told them she didn't want to serve 2 years, that she wanted to serve 2 years as the Senate. And then she signed up for that fundraising that we have right now, matching funds. Mm-hmm. She said, we want to get big money out of it. We want to get small donations from local constituents. Not so much. Dripping hypocrisy. One of the first fundraisers she had was, guess what? In New York City. None of them were her constituents. None of the money they gave were matching funds. And that's hypocrisy. And she never told her constituents. She never told you. She never told the media. Oh, by the way, this is weeks before her election to come vote for her commissioner. I'm really not going to serve 2 terms for you. I'm going to win the Senate because I've already signed up to run against Jim Tedisco. I mean, if you can't have transparency with your own constituents, how can you for the whole 44th senatorial district in the state of New York? So I think that's a sad commentator. And my constituents look for 3 things: competency, transparency, and can you answer the hypocrisy question? And really, my opponent has failed all 3 of those.
Let's pivot to education, as you a former educator yourself, and also I think your district's really interesting in that you have rural, districts, you have city districts in Saratoga, of course, Schenectady. I want the whole foundation aid conversation of how to dole out the money these days. Where do you stand on the changes to that? And I think a lot of people were concerned with how quickly it was being rolled out. I think that was one of the big issues that a lot of the school districts had. But for you, do you think changes should be made to that formula, and where should they be changed in terms of how school, we know school funding in New York State is more than anybody else. So you can touch on that too.
I talked earlier about the fact that we're representatives. We reach out to our constituents. Mm-hmm. The majority of my constituents, when I ask questions, what do you want our spending to be for? How do you feel about education? We support education. Yeah. That's something we think that's a big part of our future. Kids are our future. Their education is their future. We don't mind you spending money for education. We want the test scores to go up. We want the graduation rates to go up. So they believe in education, but they want fair education and parity. They want high need, low wealth districts, those who are suffering from a loss of maybe tax structures there, have more challenges than other communities. That to be in consideration. And there's been an appointment of a group that's evaluating foundation aid in the formula for foundation aid. So what I'm looking for is parity and fairness, all right? And I want school boards that have sufficient enough money for their communities in the rural areas, in areas like Saratoga County, in areas like Schenectady, in areas like Niskayuna, all those places I represent. I want a balanced, fair program. And it's got to be balanced on a whole bunch of issues. It's got to be balanced on the housing. It's got to be balanced on income. It's got to be balanced on the number of special education students which need heightened educational aspect. I was a special education student, got my degree from the Union College and then the College of St. Rose in special education. And I taught kids which came from toxic environments. That's got to be a consideration. I taught kids who didn't get a lunch or a breakfast. That's got to be taken into consideration. But you also have to be taken into consideration some of the wealthy districts who can afford maybe a little bit more than those who are high need, low wealth. So we have to have a balanced and one that people can understand. Right now they talk about the formula we have that there's two people, one's in a closet and there's another person who may understand it. It is so complex right now. And it shouldn't be that complex right now.
When should it change?
I think it should change in the next budget we do. And they should be working on that right now. And we should be taking care of the problem of bullying also in our schools. Because I don't know when you went to school. When I went to school, bullying did exist. Bullying exists now. That can impact a student. We need the numbers of how those happen. And you know what? We passed a bill which said we mandate when bullying takes place, you have to contact the education division at the state level and tell them who did the bullying, the name, what instance. Unfortunately, in New York State, believe this or not, and I know I asked this of my colleagues, I have the bill called Jacob's Law, where if a bullying incident takes place where you have to report it to the state education committee, you must be mandated to report it to the parents. We asked the parents to do a whole bunch of things. Come and donate your time, join the PTA, help us with fundraising, volunteer. But we're not mandated to tell them when their son or daughter's head's been slammed into a locker every day. And you and I know, when we left the school, we had some reprieve. We could go home. Not anymore. It's 24/7 right now.
You've talked about the social media aspect of that.
The social media.
It's not just a head against a locker. It could be a message or something on a chat board.
It's 24/7. Yeah. And Jacob was a young boy, 14 or 15, who was being bullied every day. Now, probably like you and me, we wouldn't go home and tell our parents. We'd try to suck it up. Well, Jacob shot himself and killed himself. The parents came to me and several other parents. Jacob Terrace was his name, the Terrace family, and they said, Senator, we didn't know anything about this, not one thing. We're not mandated to tell the one group of individuals who love their children the most that they're being bullied in school so they can mitigate it. Now, we're not only talking about the child who's being bullied, we're talking about the bullier. None of us want a child that bullies other people, and we don't want our child to be bullied. I have the bill. I passed it twice when we were in the majority. And that's another thing. Being in the majority 2 years was like, for me, Moses going to the promised land, then having to go back to the desert. Because that passed unanimously twice. Guess what? After we went into the minority, they won't bring the bill out of committee anymore. To tell parents when their children are being bullied. And I said, raise your hand in committee. Raise your hand if you would not know that your child is bullying someone or your child is being bullied in school. Nobody raises their hand. If we believe in our parents, if we want them to be more active in our educational aspect, run for the school board, come and volunteer, you better well tell them that their child is being bullied in school so they can have an impact and be part of the plan for that.
Along some of those same lines, maybe parent involvement is a portion of this, but the governor has said, and she's gone around the state, of course, it's about social media, addictive feeds, but also the cell phone bans, if you will. And I went to, there was a conference last week. I spoke to a bunch of students about this that were high school seniors. They said, oh, you know, my school does this, and yeah, it's okay, I can be out with my phone. It's across the spectrum. It's really interesting what kids say about this in terms of not having a phone on them or with them over the course of a school day for a variety of reasons, maybe depending on the district as well. Where do you stand? Do you think students should lock their phone up and not have them throughout the day, or some of these different protocols where they're not supposed to have the phone? And the governor has said she doesn't want any phones at any time.
It's partially a necessity, I think. When I was a kid and I caused trouble, my parents would say, go to your room and stay in your room. You know what they say now? Get out of the house and go do something outside the house, because the telephones and the computers are in the room, okay? Yep. It's just the opposite now. The Surgeon General, not too long ago, nationally we have a pandemic. You and I probably know, and some of those know what that pandemic was he was talking about. Isolation and loneliness. That type of communication leads to isolation and loneliness. And it does impact in education, I think. It's an important tool. It's a safety tool. I think at some point during the school day, they should have access to it. If they have to interact with their parents, they have a medical appointment they have to go to, a dental appointment or something, they're going to have a practice that's going to go late or something. But for the majority of the day as an educator, anything that distracts our students from learning, math, science, English, social studies, a little bit about the history of the United States of America, the true history of our nation, the Constitution, anything that distracts for that with the money we spend per child in New York State is something we shouldn't allow to happen. I'm not saying abolish it totally, but I do think it should be for the predominant of the day, they should not have that phone available for them.
Okay, I do mention the governor, circling back to just something before, and you talked about being in the supermajorities and the governor being a Democrat. I wonder, because we talked about the tweaks to bail reform. Yeah. Like she has been, you could say, in that conference, one of the voices that have been trying to roll it back, I guess, water it down from what the original bail reform laws were to allow the judges to give them more discretion. We've heard her say that, and she put a whole bunch of money towards retail theft and put that task force together this year. Do you see her, the governor, as being a voice that is moderating a bit towards some of those supermajorities, some of those state or those city legislators? Do you see that at all right now in terms of how she's led and governed?
I'm sad to say she's a day late and a dollar short. We said there's a saying, watch out what you wish for, you get. We saw Governor Cuomo. We saw that executive order he did. And by the way, I have the investigation with Ron Kim to actually have a nonpartisan, bipartisan investigation of what that executive order meant to put those who have that COVID contagious disease put into nursing homes. A third grader would know not to do something like that. She only seems to react or act when it's too late. She had this congestion thing going on. Oh, it's 100%. It's lovely. It's going to happen. All of a sudden, she realized what it was going to cost her constituents. She got knee deep into it. We're going to stop it right now. But after the election, guess what? You're going to see hundreds of millions of billions of dollars of constituent money going to congestion. She just, I believe, didn't want to do it before the election. She seems like a nice lady. I think she's in over her head. The numbers is she's so far underwater, it's unbelievable in terms of the polling that's being done. I think she could have done a better job getting out in front of many of these issues. In looking at the two top issues, affordability, a cost of living, the taxes, the mandates. Look, when all of us, my constituents tell me, Senator, I come out of a grocery store with a bag of groceries, I look at the bill, I got 2 bags of groceries for what I paid for one here. I go to the gas pump to fill up my car for a gallon of gas. I got 2 gallons of gas for what I'm paying for one right now. Everything costs more. The question is for them, are we better off than we were 6 years ago when they controlled all levers of power now than we were? And unfortunately, my constituents tell me, no, we're not better there, and no, we're not better on the federal level. And the agenda is not working, because if it was working, would we be #1 in out-migration? Would people be voting with their feet? Would we be one of 7 states that lost another congressman because of lost population? And you could say all you want. I've got a new agenda to solve all these problems. But the federal level had 4 years with the President Biden and Kamala. And my colleagues had 6 years with the supermajorities controlling all levels. I'm kind of proud that most of my bills that I think can make the changes are locked up in committee. Because if my bills were responsible for the agenda we have right now, I don't think I'd want to run for office. I couldn't go before the guards, but now I can go before them and say that I deal in facts, not attacks. And they won't see me actually attacking my opponent, but I have to tell the truth about her actions. And I don't make up things like, because you voted for a budget, you were against everything in a budget. That is not being truthful to your constituents.
So 4 decades, right? You're going on here.
Yep.
Why keep going? What's keeping you in the game?
Well, I served with people that were there one day, and I didn't think they should come back the second day. I served with people there who were there 20, 30, 40 years. In fact, I'll give you an example. The fella I fouled, you may not remember who he is, but some of my constituents are. Senator Hugh Farley was a great senator. He probably could have served 5, 10 years. I always loved that Lou Gehrig. Not the movie, Really, Lou Gehrig, when he was in Yankee Stadium, standing there, knew he was going to die, didn't know it would be Lou Gehrig's disease, we'd name it after him, but stood there and said, and looked at that crowd, unbelievable crowd, I stand here before you, feeling as though I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth. I get up every morning from the first day to today when I rejoice to come to meet with you, Tom. Love my job. I feel so bad for people who have to get up and go to work and dislike or hate their job, but say, I need the money, I haven't found the job I love. I found the job I relish. I found the job standing up and fighting for the constituents who I believe have tremendous faith in me. And if I wasn't doing my job, Tom, in this redistricting, the other side wouldn't took my house 1.5 miles out of my district. I had to sell my house. I had to move and build another house, but I loved the job so much I did it. And I like to say I kind of got back at them. I won by close to 20,000 votes last time around. And with the help of the constituents and the people I represent, I have full faith in them. They're the only endorsement that is the most important endorsement. I love the AFL-CIO. I love the PEF. I love CSEA. I love the carpenters. I love NICE at the teachers. I love the Business Council. I went before 20 groups of individuals and interviewed. All 20 of them endorsed me, not my opponent. I think that says something about the voice they believe I have to stand up for them and the constituents I represent and the state of New York.
You mentioned Lou Gehrig. We got a Yankees-Mets World Series. Hypothetically, who are you rooting for? Who are you going to endorse in that?
Well, I'm not going to wear a hat that says Mets and Yankees. I'm a Yankee fan. I'm a Yankee fan, okay?
Right.
But I know several of my constituents are Mets fans. Hey, it'll be great one or the other wins to have a New York champion. That would be fantastic.
Senator Tedisco, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming in.
I really appreciate you and Channel 6. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button right now so you can stay up to date on these news-making conversations about the issues impacting New Yorkers the most: power and politics.